A new Politico poll shows voters support Senator Elizabeth Warren's plan to raise taxes on the very richest among us. 61% support her plan for a wealth tax on wealth more than $50 million. Her plan is also supported by half of Republicans. The poll comes after billionaire Howard Schultz called Senator Warren's plan, quote, ridiculous. Today, Senator Warren tweeted the new poll results and this. Dear Howard Schultz, if you're looking for bold ideas with broad bipartisan appeal for your centrist presidential campaign, may I suggest my ultra-millionaire tax. At last month's gathering of some of the richest people in the world in Davos, Switzerland, none of them had a real answer to Dutch historian Rutger Bregman, who said this about the 70% top marginal tax rate for incomes over $10 million, now advocated by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. I mean, it feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water. Just stop talking about philanthropy and start talking about taxes. Taxes. We need to, I mean, just 2 days ago, there was a billionaire in here, what's his name? Michael Dell. And he asked the question like, name me one country where a top marginal tax rate of 70% has actually worked. And, you know, I'm a historian. The United States, that's where it has actually worked, in the 1950s. We can talk for a very long time about all these stupid philanthropy schemes. We can invite Bono once more, but come on, we gotta be talking about taxes.
Next, we will be joined by one of the people who Senator Elizabeth Warren consulted with when she was designing her proposal to tax wealth over $50 million.
For me, there's a fundamental fairness question here. The fact that we don't tax wealth is one more way in which the system has been rigged by the rich and powerful, for the rich and powerful.
Joining our discussion now, one of the economists who consulted with Senator Elizabeth Warren about that wealth tax plan. Gabriel Zucman is a professor of economics at the University of California at Berkeley. Professor Zucman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And you and another economist there at Berkeley worked with Senator Warren on this. What is the case for taxing wealth instead of the income that wealth generates?
Well, the case is that many wealthy individuals have a ton of wealth, but very little taxable income. Now, take Warren Buffett, for instance. According to Forbes magazine, he has more than $80 billion in wealth. But because his company, Berkshire Hathaway, doesn't pay dividends, his taxable income is very small. And so he just pays a few $1 million a year in taxes, which is tiny compared to his wealth of $80 billion. So that's why, to properly tax the wealthy, you need not only income taxes, but you also need wealth taxes. If you only increase income taxes, you're not going to be able to properly tax Warren Buffett and other billionaires like him.
Is there an example of a wealth tax like this somewhere in the world? I know everyone thinks of the state and local taxes, property taxes in the United States. That is our American example of wealth taxation, and that's taxing the biggest aspect of most people's wealth, taxing their homes. But that's the state doing that, not the federal government, and not on the vast kind of holdings you're talking about. Is there something out there in the world that resembles the tax you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, many countries have or had taxes on net wealth, total assets, not only real estate, but including financial assets, net of debts. So today, in a country like Switzerland, the wealth tax generates about 1% of GDP in tax revenue, which is what we estimate the Warren wealth tax would generate in the US. And the Swiss wealth tax works relatively well. So yes, there are a number of compelling cases where wealth taxation works. I would say that what makes the proposal of Elizabeth Warren original is that it targets the ultra-rich, people who have more than $50 million in net wealth, and that has never been done in any country. Typically, the countries that have wealth taxes, the wealth tax starts around $1 or $2 million in net wealth. In the US, it would be above $50 million. But because wealth is so concentrated in the US, even by taxing people who have more than $50 million in net wealth, you would collect 1% of GDP in revenue, which would be about as much as in Switzerland, where the wealth tax starts at around $1 million in wealth.
Let's listen to what Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, said about this.
When I see Elizabeth Warren come out with, a ridiculous plan of taxing wealthy people, a surtax of 2% because it makes a good headline, or she sends out a tweet when she knows in a fact that's not something that's ever going to be passed. This is what's wrong. I mean, you can't just attack these things in a punitive way by punishing people.
What's your reaction to that, Professor Zucman?
I think what is radical is to not tax the wealthy. Wealth inequality has increased enormously in the United States. The top 0.1% wealthiest families now own about as much wealth as the bottom 90% of the distribution. In both cases, about 20% of total U.S. wealth. So that is doable, and that's everything but radical.
We're going to have to leave it there. Professor Zucman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Gabriel Zucman gets tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Brian Williams starts now.